Hi, I'm glad that you joined me for A Hero in You. It's where we are just having a conversation, or really it's one way, obviously I'm talking to you and you're listening, but you can talk back if you want, feel free. I won't interrupt you. But we're thinking about the hero that God has created in each one of us. And one of the characteristics that I think is something that we see over and over again that becomes essential for us as we're going to try to add depth to our life is the fact that we've got to learn to be generous. Generosity, I believe, is love in action. And I think love is measured in what we give, not in what we take. And we live in a world, to be honest with you, that loves to talk about generosity. But there is always that subtext or subtitle in the people that you meet that are asking the question, what's in it for me? And love and life, I think, is most enjoyed when we give ourselves away. And yet that is a part of the call and the command of Christ. You are the best version of you when you are able to give of yourself and share the love that God has placed in you. I was asked one time, and I defined it quickly, but as I've come back now and thought about it through the years, I think I was accurate when I said it, that generosity is the overflow of God's love. I think that when God starts to love you, your heart begins to expand. As we've talked about the transformation process, and you begin to change from the inside out. And I think the more that your heart grows and the more generous, or the more your heart becomes full of the love of God, the more your tendency is to lean toward that generosity side and want to give. Generosity isn't about how much we give, but it has to do with the cost to us. And what I mean by that is, I can give you probably $1 right now. And you could say, well, Jeff, that's really generous and I needed $1. And I'd say, well, thank you. And I'd feel pretty good about myself. But at the end of the day, God has blessed me enough to the point where, I'm not going to feel the pain of that $1. It's not really going to cost me very much. I don't have to ponder that a great deal. Me giving you the $1 is not a mark of my generosity. The truth of the matter is, if you ask me for $100, that's not as easy, but I could come up with that too, probably. I'm not wealthy by any stretch of imagination, but I like to share what God has given. So I can set it up for you. I can get you $100. But when the numbers start getting bigger and bigger, then all of a sudden that becomes a little bit more problem. That becomes a little bit more complicated. There begins to become that moment where I have to start thinking about, okay, to do what I want to do and to do what I think God wants me to do, it's going to cost me something. And that's where we start getting to this piece where this conversation about generosity is where the rubber meets the road. See, we want to sacrifice, and we want to say we sacrifice, but we don't want sacrifice to cost us anything. But by design, if sacrifice doesn't really cost you anything, it's not really a sacrifice. It's just something that you did. And I think God expects us to give out of the abundance of what He gives to us. But at the same time, I think that generosity even wells deeper within, where there's a desire to give to the point where you really start managing the resources that God gives you in a way that makes it not about you, but about others. That's a big concept. But there's a hero that is waiting within you, that when you become that person that God wants you to be, generosity begins to flow and it begins to just kind of ebb out of you. Jesus, I think if you look at his life and you were to try to put his life in terms of a secular culture, it would be safe to say that Jesus is the greatest example of an incurable romantic. And what I mean by that is not disrespect at all. What I mean by that is Jesus is the only model we've ever seen or ever had of unconditional love. He just would love no matter what. And he was willing to love no matter what anybody else did, believing and trusting that that love was powerful enough to change the recipient of that love forever. See, I don't know if you've ever thought about that relationship you have with Jesus that way, but you ought to. Because as one author has called it, it is the divine romance. It is that moment when you start connecting with your Creator in such a love relationship where you recognize that He has loved you with such an unconditional love, and that doesn't matter how you respond to it, but He knows that love is powerful enough to change you from the inside out if you will give Him just a little bit of room to work, and it does. And because of that love, we're able to give back, and we're able to share, and we're able to touch and change the world with the love of Christ. See, when we talk about depth here at the church at 434, I always tell you that one of the growth markers, one of the things that you have to look at, one of the sides of our container that we use as our model is generosity. Learning to have the ability to give and manage the resources that God gives you wisely. And the deeper you grow, and the more that you love, the more that you find ways, creative ways at times, to be generous and more generous and more generous. We've used the phrase here, it's true, we're blessed, not so we can hoard the blessings, but so we can bless others. And to live the heroic life that you are called to live, there is no shortcut about this. If you're going to be the hero God created you to be, you have to learn to be generous. But you can be, because the love of Christ is that powerful and can change you from the inside out. Just a few thoughts. You think about that. Be the hero that you were created to be. Touch and change the world with the love of Christ. And join me again next time as we chat a little bit about the hero within you.